Every morning, across the United States alone, more than 37 million people wake up and reach for a pill. They take it with water, they take it with breakfast, they take it because their doctor told them to, they take it because they believe there is no other way. One of those pills costs $200 to $500 a month without insurance. The plant that may do the same job, and in some clinical studies has done it faster, is growing in the crack of your sidewalk right now. It is growing in the park where you walk your dog. It is growing in the lot behind your child's school. Your neighbor sprayed it last Tuesday. The lawn care industry calls it a problem. The herbicide manufacturers call it a target. The United States has spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to eliminate it from every suburban yard in the country. The people who have studied it for over 1,000 years call it medicine. Its name is Taraxacum officinale. The world calls it a dandelion. The first medical text to formally document dandelion was not written by a Western physician in a university laboratory. It was written in China. Over 1,000 years ago, in Tang Dynasty manuscripts from the 7th century, physicians described a plant they called Pu Gong Ying, the public spirit herb. They used it to support digestion. They used it to clear the liver. They used it for exactly the categories of metabolic imbalance that we now classify in modern clinical language as insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. The tradition did not stay contained to China. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Arabian physicians, who were running the most sophisticated medical institutions on the planet at that time, had incorporated dandelion into their formal clinical practice. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, referenced it in the Canon of Medicine, one of the most widely reproduced and translated medical texts in human history. He prescribed it for liver disorders. He prescribed it for digestive failure. He prescribed it for the systemic metabolic dysregulation that sits in every culture's traditional medical framework at the root of blood sugar disease. Across medieval Europe, the pattern repeated. English, French, German, and Italian herbalists catalogued it under different names: Leontodon, Pissenlit, Loenzan, but used it for the same purposes: blood purification, metabolic balance, liver support, the kind of foundational systemic function that every modern endocrinologist will confirm is central to how type 2 diabetes develops and progresses. Then came 1620. When the Mayflower crossed the Atlantic, the dandelion crossed with it. Not by accident, intentionally. European settlers carried dandelion seeds because they understood what the plant could do. They planted it alongside their vegetables. They brewed its root as tea. They ate its leaves raw in spring. They used it in the same way their grandparents had used it and their grandparents before them, as food and as medicine. It grew freely in every garden they kept. For 200 years on American soil, the dandelion was a resource. Then someone decided it was a weed. Before we discuss who made that decision and why, we need to understand what dandelion actually contains, because the compounds inside this plant are not folklore. These are not anecdotes. They are isolated, identified, and published in peer-reviewed literature. There are 4 active compound families inside the dandelion root that directly act on blood sugar regulation. The first is inulin. Dandelion root is one of the most concentrated natural sources of inulin on the planet. Inulin is a prebiotic dietary fiber that passes through the stomach without digestion. A 2020 meta-analysis in clinical nutrition journals analyzed 12 controlled trials and found that inulin supplementation significantly reduced fasting plasma glucose, lowered HbA1c values, and improved insulin resistance scores, the 3 markers physicians use to evaluate long-term blood sugar control. Every one of those outcomes moved in the right direction, all 3 simultaneously. The second compound is chlorogenic acid. In the liver, chlorogenic acid targets an enzyme called glucose-6-phosphatase. That enzyme is responsible for releasing stored glucose into the blood between meals, which is why fasting blood sugar stays elevated in type 2 diabetics even when they have not eaten. When chlorogenic acid inhibits that release, blood sugar during fasting drops. A 2020 review confirmed that chlorogenic acid also directly stimulates insulin secretion from pancreatic beta cells, producing the same effect that prescription sulfonylurea drugs attempt to generate through synthetic chemistry. The third compound is chichoric acid. Chichoric acid works on a separate mechanism entirely. It increases glucose uptake in skeletal muscle cells, meaning it helps muscle tissue pull circulating sugar out of the bloodstream and convert it into energy, bypassing the need for normal insulin signaling. This is the same biological pathway targeted by a class of drugs pharmaceutical companies currently sell at prices that reach $500 per patient per month. The fourth compound group is the sesquiterpene lactones, taraxasterol, and taraxacin specifically. These compounds reduce systemic inflammation at the cellular level. Why does that matter for blood sugar? Because type 2 diabetes is not simply a disease of sugar. It is a disease of inflammatory disruption at the insulin receptor. When chronic inflammation blocks the receptor, the body stops responding to its own insulin. When that inflammation is reduced, the receptor begins to work again. The body hears the insulin signal. 4 separate mechanisms, 4 separate pathways, 1 plant growing for free in your front yard. Now here is the number that demands attention. A 2023 clinical study, not an animal model, not a cell culture, a study conducted on human patients with diagnosed type 2 diabetes, measured fasting blood glucose before and after consuming dandelion root extract twice daily for 4 days. Patients used no pharmaceutical intervention during the study period. Their average blood sugar dropped from 233 to 152. That is a 35% reduction in 4 days. A major long-term metformin trial found average HbA1c reductions of approximately 1.5% over 12 weeks of daily use. Dandelion is not operating on the same slow, single pathway mechanism as a synthetic drug. It is running 4 biological programs at once, and the drop in the data reflects that. But the dandelion's most important quality is not its speed. It is what it refuses to do. Metformin, the world's most prescribed diabetes drug, carries a documented risk of lactic acidosis, a dangerous accumulation of lactate in the blood that can escalate to organ failure. Studies estimate the incidence at 3 to 10 cases per 100,000 person years of use. It cannot be given to patients with impaired kidney function without risk of dangerous accumulation. It depletes vitamin B12 in long-term users at measurable rates. It causes gastrointestinal distress severe enough to require discontinuation in a meaningful share of patients. Dandelion has been consumed as food and medicine across 4 continents for over 1,000 years. No equivalent toxicity profile exists. The science does not dispute this. The science confirms it. In 1944, the United States Chemical Warfare Service, the same institution that had spent years developing chemical agents for combat, turned its attention to plants. The goal was selective elimination. Researchers tested more than 1,000 synthetic compounds for their ability to kill specific plant types without harming others. One compound emerged above all of them. It was called 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid. The industry shortened it to 2,4-D. What made 2,4-D remarkable was its precision. It attacked broadleaf plants and left grass completely untouched. It hijacked the plant's own growth hormone system, forcing uncontrolled cell proliferation until the plant consumed itself. An environmental chemist later described it as a kind of cancer for plants. A single application, observed in a Chicago test lawn, eliminated 95% of dandelions while leaving every blade of grass undamaged. Here was a product that could be sold to tens of millions of American homeowners. By the early 1950s, the suburban lawn had become a cultural identity marker. A uniform carpet of grass with no variation, no wildflowers, and no broadleaf plants of any kind became the publicly legible symbol of domestic order and respectability. The dandelion, which had grown in American gardens as food and medicine for 2 centuries, was reclassified, not through any scientific process, through advertising. Seed companies removed dandelion from their product catalogs. Lawn care companies built their entire revenue model around its elimination. Chemical manufacturers expanded their operations specifically around the promise of a dandelion-free American yard. By the early 2000s, Americans were applying an estimated £27 million of 2,4-D to lawns, parks, cemeteries, and recreational spaces every single year. When safety questions began surfacing, a 1986 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association linked 2,4-D exposure in agricultural workers to elevated rates of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The 4 largest chemical manufacturers collectively spent more than $30 million on research designed to defend the compound's continued use. The dandelion was not just being killed, it was being systematically erased from the American landscape through an institutional infrastructure built specifically to sustain that erasure. And then the pharmaceutical dimension arrived. In 2025, the United States Food and Drug Administration issued formal warning letters to 15 companies, including several sourcing natural diabetes products from India, ordering them to immediately cease selling what the agency classified as unapproved treatments for diabetes. The agency required these products to undergo the full pharmaceutical approval pathway. That pathway costs, on average, between $100 million and $300 million to complete. It is a pathway that applies exclusively to products that can be owned. The dandelion cannot be patented. No pharmaceutical company can file intellectual property claims on a root that grows wild across every temperate climate on Earth. A compound that cannot be patented cannot generate the kind of protected return that justifies a $300 million regulatory process, and so it does not go through that process. The global diabetes pharmaceutical market generated $1.015 trillion in health expenditure in 2024 alone. A study published in Nature Medicine projects the total macroeconomic burden of diabetes from 2020 to 2050 at $10.2 trillion, with the absolute costs highest in the United States, China, and India. That is not a health statistic. That is a protected revenue category. And a plant that grows for free on every continent is not compatible with a category of that size. Here is what the researchers who have spent careers studying this plant are willing to say on the record. A 2016 review examining dandelion's full physiological profile concluded that its bioactive compound architecture represents one of the most compelling documented candidates for natural anti-diabetic intervention in the current scientific literature. A 2022 review in Nutrients found that dandelion's 3 primary metabolically active compounds, chicoraic acid, chlorogenic acid, and inulin, collectively address obesity, insulin resistance, and vascular inflammation simultaneously. Not sequentially, not independently, at the same time. A 2024 antioxidant study that analyzed dandelion root extracts confirmed the presence of caffeoyl quinic acid compounds, the same chemical family that, in documented long-term human consumption studies, has been shown to lower blood glucose levels, increase insulin sensitivity, alleviate insulin resistance in the liver, reduce circulating lipids, and support sustained weight loss. None of these studies were funded by the dandelion industry. There is no dandelion industry. That is precisely the point. The results were published because the data demanded it. And yet, in the cities where diabetes rates are highest, in the neighborhoods where prescription drug access is lowest, in the communities where insulin rationing has been documented as a public health emergency, the dandelion continues to push through sidewalk cracks, and residents continue to spend $15 on a bottle of herbicide to remove it. Here is what this means for what you do this week. The root, not the leaf, not the flower, the root is where the highest concentration of all 4 active compounds resides. Dried dandelion root can be brewed as a simple tea, 2 cups per day. If you have access to unsprayed dandelion roots, the harvest cost is nothing. If you prefer to purchase dried root from a reputable herbal supplier, the cost is approximately $2 to $3 per month. The leaf is edible raw and contains chlorogenic acid in concentrations that produce measurable reductions in blood sugar after meals, documented in published studies, not in health blogs. You do not need a prescription. You do not need an insurance approval. You do not need to wait for a pharmaceutical company to synthesize, patent, and price the compound for you. You prepare it the way it has been prepared in China for 1400 years. You prepare it the way Arabic physicians prepared it in the 10th century. You prepare it the way European settlers prepared it when they crossed an ocean and made sure to bring the seeds with them. You make tea with a root that your government currently pays to exterminate. You do this while the herbicide industry lobbies for expanded noxious weed classifications. You do this while pharmaceutical companies accelerate their research into synthetic derivatives of the exact compounds found naturally in the plant they are racing to replace. You do this because the history is there. The chemistry is there. The clinical data is there. The only thing that has never been there is the financial incentive to make sure anyone told you. If this video reached someone in your life who is managing blood sugar on a budget they cannot sustain, share it. Not for a view count, not for an algorithm, because somewhere right now, a person is rationing the dose of a pill they cannot afford. And the answer to that specific problem is pushing through the soil in front of their house. America called it a weed. 1,000 years of medicine called it something entirely different.